Welcome to the Cognitive Science Digital Humanities podcast, where Dr. West considers the humanity of AI and what the success of AI might tell us about the human mind. In this episode, Dr. West provides a high level description of how large language models work and how we can think about them using trains, holograms, and high dimensional rivers.
Okay, so I'm going to give a very high-level description of how large language models work. So it's going to be high level, so easy to understand. And it's going to leave out a lot of detail, and that's fine because you can't discuss all the detail and there's so much detail that it would just overwhelm the conversation. So I think I have a take that slices it nicely off at as I said, a higher level. Okay, so first of all, I'm not going to talk about learning and how it learns, except to say that I'll say a little bit about it through the course of it, but basically it's learned through backpropagation. So it reads things on the internet and then it guesses the next word in a sentence or what word comes next. And then it checks, was that right? And then it either rewards or punishes the network for that. Now, learning is done offline. So it learns and learns and learns and learns, and then it's frozen. All the weights in the network are frozen, and then you use it. So there's no learning going on when you use it, except in the context window, where it's updating that context window. But it's not updating its connections in the neural network. Okay, so let's leave that at that. And that's the learning. Now, transformer networks operate in a special way, and they operate in a way that allows them to be very parallel in their processing. So I'm going to kind of blip over that too. Obviously, it has implications for how the network works. And there's a lot of, parallel, tiny networks actually. Transformers made up of many tiny networks. And I'll try and say a little bit about that, but I don't want to go into that too much either, because that's more of a power thing, how it operates so in parallel, otherwise it would be too slow. And there may be other aspects of how it operates that affect it, but again, let's keep going. Okay, now let's look at the context window, or I'll call it the context window. Some people want to call it working memory, like everything that you kind of know now, the now of where you are. Okay, could be the let's leave consciousness out of it. Scratch consciousness, leave it out. It's just the now and the recent history. And what it is, okay, so I'm going to describe this. At the top end of the model, what's going in at the top is, imagine it like a train or a train yard. And there's this long track. And on the track, there's all these boxcars that can contain a word. Okay? So you get the first word, and the first car goes on the tracks. Get another word, second word, that car goes on the tracks in front of the other one, because it's the next word. So going left to right, you're always adding from the right and pushing the cars backwards. Okay, so you keep adding the next word, the next word, the next word, and eventually the track will fill up. And then you have to start dumping the oldest words. So when the track is full, the last car will be removed, all the cars will be moved back, and the latest word will be placed at the front. Okay. Now, these words are not represented as words, but as vectors. So each word has a random vector assigned to it. So each word has a long list of numbers associated with it. And that number is the unique identifier of that word. And now there's a lot of stuff with vectors, and there's different ways to think about this and to talk about this. And in fact, different ways to build this. I'm going to talk about it in very general terms. But what's important right now is that each of these vectors describes an address in very high dimensional space, right? So if we had a two-dimensional space like we do on the flat Earth, then I can give you the or even the rounder, I can give you the longitude and the latitude, and you can find that location, okay? And that's, so longitude, latitude, that's like an address. You can find it. If you're in space, you know, I would have to use 3 addresses or 3 numbers, right? I'd have to say how much to rotate left or right, how far in front, and then how much up or down, okay? So that's a 3-dimensional. Now, these vectors that go in that represent each word are quite large. So you're talking dimensions in the tens of thousands, or I don't even know how big it is. I would have to check, but very, very, very large. So impossible for us to visualize. And the important thing to know here, though, is that we shouldn't go with our visualization too much here, because in a very high dimensional space, it acts differently. So the easiest way to put this, or I find an easy example, is say I have a vector, just random vectors standing for, let's just do an abstract example. So I have something called A, and it is very far away from B, okay? But B can be very close to C. So B is close to C, and A is far from B. So what would we normally say about A is that it's far from C. But in a high dimensional space, that's not necessarily the case. A could be far from B. They could both be close to C and not close to each other, okay? So you get these interesting effects in high dimensional space, and allows you to categorize a lot of things and to understand things in a lot of different dimensions. It's actually quite powerful. So, okay, and there's lots of work on earlier language models using this sort of vector high dimensional space thing, showing that it works very, very well for language and other things too. So, okay, so we've got these boxcars going across the top, each with a vector representing a word, and you can literally read the sentence if you know the words, right? It's just in order from left to right. Okay, now, when it processes it, so it gets a word and it pushes it on the track at the front. The old word, last word, the oldest word drops off. And then what happens is each word then percolates downwards and is processed individually in parallel. So this is the parallel part. So you can think of it as a big grid. So on the top is the train tracks. And then under the train tracks, under each boxcar position, is series of networks going down. And each level of the networks have 2 neural networks in them. The first one is the attentional layer, or the attentional network, let's say. And then the second one is the feed-forward layer. They're going to do... Now, nobody's exactly sure how these are working because it's programmed... You know, when you make a neural network and you train it, it's kind of a black box. You have to work backwards and probe it to see what it actually programmed itself to do. But generally speaking, they're going to do different things because they're actually different, okay? So let's take, say we've got a sentence, cat. Then the first word, is going to be in the boxcar, and then the second word, cat, will be in a boxcar. And then, so the first word, is going to go down, and it's going to go through an attentional layer and a feed-forward layer. Then it's going to drop to the next level, go through an attentional layer, feed-forward network layer, feed-forward network, and so on down. This is a tricky point that they have 2 networks at each level. And when they're doing the backpropagation for training, this actually creates an interesting optimization problem that we don't talk about too much, but it's actually very important. But I'm not going to talk about it because it's complex. Just basically, no, I'm not going to talk about learning. That will complexify it too much. Okay, so each word just sort of drops down, down, down. So goes down, down, down. Cat goes down, 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 and so on. Down, 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 all in parallel. Now, at each level, though, so when goes to the first level, and it hits the attentional network, its attentional network will be the same one as in the next row or the next column over, and that'll be the cat going through the same one. So across in the rows, the networks are the same. Okay, but down each level, they are different. Okay, so this is the architecture. Okay, so now what is going on with the attentional and the feed-forward networks? Well, I'm going to tell sort of an overly simple story here, but I think it's okay as long as we realize that. So let's first look at the let's first look at the feed-forward networks. So you've got them all feeding forward, and essentially that's a deep neural network. We've done a lot of work on deep neural networks, and we sort of know. Well, we like to tell a nice clean story, and I've heard it's not as clean as we would like it to be, but let's tell the clean version of the story. So say I have a deep neural network with the feed forward networks, just no attentional networks, just feed forward, down, 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 down. Okay, so what's going to happen? Let's say I have a good example that a lot of people reference is training a network to recognize human handwriting or the human writing of numbers. So that's pretty messy. People write numbers wildly differently. You can train, but we can read them, and you can train a deep neural network to read them. And then when they analyze it, they find that the different layers have learned different things. So one layer is looking for straight horizontal lines. The other layer is looking for curvy lines. Another layer is looking for closed loops. Another layer is looking for vertical lines, and so on. And then it picks out all these things because in learning, it picked these out as being vaguely what is common across how all these different people write numbers, right? So a 9 is more or less a stick with a circle going to the left. So these are things that the networks will learn and kind of specialize at each level or somehow distribute that across the levels. I like the story where each level does something that we can clearly understand. But it's not always like that. But okay, so that's what the feed-forward networks are doing as they go down, 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 down. But it's doing it for each word. So each word gets its own individual treatment. But the attentional layer or the attentional networks are in there at each layer too, or at each level. So the terminology is a bit tricky. So what are the attentional networks doing? They're not exactly like the feed-forward networks. They are feed-forward networks, but they have a mechanism embedded in them. So basically, what they're going to do, and this is hard to describe, and sometimes this is understood as a holographic system. Essentially, what they're going to do is they're going to make it so the word comes down cat, but then I don't want the word to be cat. I don't want that cat vector. I want a different vector that explains the word cat in terms of the whole sentence. So you can think of it, so I want the in the cat. So it's not just cat, it's a cat. So that's a pretty simple example, but you can imagine there's a lot of words. Each word has to, so this layer is going to create a vector that considers or collapses across all the other words' relationship to that one word. So every word, so a word comes in, vector comes in representing a word, and then it's going to be transformed into a new code that represents that word in terms of the word in the context of the whole sentence or the whole context window. Okay, so it's contextualizing each word. Each word is understood in terms of its role in the sentence vis-a-vis all the other words. Okay, the reason we call it holographic is, well, not everybody calls it holographic, but anyway, holographic just refers to holograms. and the notion that in a hologram, every pixel or every part of the picture knows its relationship to all the other pixels and knows a lot of things. It's built into it. I bring this up. I personally like the hologram approach to understanding it. I don't know, based on my own history and use of these things. So I'm going to kind of lean that way. Now, so basically what it's doing is it's taking a word and saying, okay, now give me the new vector that understands this word. Okay, but understands this word in what sense? Is it the same from level to level to level? No, because what it's doing is it's contextualizing the word for the feed-forward neural network underneath it. This is a tricky thing where I said both of them are getting feedback during the learning. So you want so basically the feed-forward network is just, yeah, just do your best to predict with all the other feed-forward network. But the attentional networks are constrained. They're like, I really need you to consider how we're to actually, I don't want to go into this too much, but it has to consider all the other words and make up a vector representing that word from all the other words. Okay? And it has to also consider in making that what the feed-forward network underneath it's going to do, because it's contextualizing it based on what's above, which is all the words coming in, and what's below the feed-forward network. Okay, then at the next level, what goes forward is whatever comes out of the feed-forward network. So you can see the original words are getting lost pretty quickly, and the vectors are being changed and changed and changed and changed as they go down. Now, when they get to the bottom, how do you get the words back? Well, you get some sort of vector, and you just say, in the high dimensional space, you say, which word vector from the original vectors assigned to each word, which one is closest to that? And then you just say, that's that word. So it won't be a perfect match, but they'll be like, no, that word that's very close to the word cat. So that's actually cat. Okay, and so they all come down. Okay, then once they're at the bottom, essentially what you get. Now I'm going to really skip to a very abstract way of looking at this. And I think this is a very good way to look at it. And it gets kind of complicated here, but we're not going to deal with the complications. I'll just say this relates to Hopfield networks. This is in fact how Hopfield himself views these things. So essentially you're talking, so we're not going to go into a Hopfield network, but he's claiming that, and I think most people are agreeing with this, that essentially you can treat this thing as generating in the abstract as a Hopfield network. So what does that mean? It means that what's coming out the bottom, you can use to create an address in the very, very, very high dimensional space. Okay? And we won't go into that at all, but just, it's going to be like, oh, I need to find this place in this high dimensional space. Okay. And that place represents the entire context, the entire everything where you're at with the sentence. Okay. Now, the metaphor that Hopfield uses is you go to that place and you pour some water there. And then that water flows down, and the first word that it hits, that's the next word. Just that simple. Okay? Flows to the next word, just flows downhill. And in a Hopfield network, you think it's like an energy gradient, so it's flowing downward to lower energy states. At least that's how some people would describe it. Okay, but I'm going to use water. So you pour the glass of water there in this super high dimensional space, super high dimensional topography, and it flows down, and that gives you your next word. Okay, then you take that word, move the train cars back one, put it at the front, and do it again. Gives you another address. Now, this other address is going to be probably close to the last one. but not exactly the same. And this is really important because when you pour the water there, it's going to flow to a different place. And that's the next word. Then you take that word, move the trains, put it at the top, down it comes again. You get a new address, which is going to be, and this is, the reason I'm saying this is important, is that because I'm going to sort of double up on this metaphor. So, and the water flows down and gives you the next word. Okay. So you are moving around in the high dimensional space each time it gets changed. But here's the thing. It's probably not moving that far. So you can think of, and this, so again, this is the metaphor I'm going to use. Think of it as valleys or gullies, right? So if something's entered a gully, then it's going to be hard for it to climb out and easier for it, because each time you pour the water, it's going to go down. And then it's going to come up with a new address. It is probably very close to that one. It would be hard for one word to massively change it. Although, depending on the word that comes up, some words are not going to hardly move it at all. And other words that change the context a fair amount will move it and could move it up and out of that gully, out of that valley. But it's going to, but then it always flows down. Okay. So basically, yeah, so as the sentence is formed, it's in a high dimensional spaces, it's running down. You could see it as running down a valley, sort of hopping around a little bit, but actually not getting out of the valley and running down it. And that's what's making your sentence. Okay? Okay. Yeah, so it's just flowing. And let's see, do I have anything to add there? No, I think that's it. I'm just going to add, so Wolfram actually has put out this idea, which I've sort of thinking along these lines. And so it makes me feel better when other people say that, lay out the same thoughts. And I think a number of people are thinking this, so is that what the feed forward networks are picking up, and with the help of the attentional networks, are things like, well, we know it's things like grammar, but it's also things like tone, organization, logic, these things. These are all being picked up in those layers. And it's interesting because, a long time ago, when we didn't know about grammar or logic. It took us a long time to observe ourselves and say, there's a grammar there. Okay, let's write the rules for that. Oh, there's logic. We can write the rules for logic, or some of the logic that we're using. But people use logic and use grammar without knowing the rules. They just learn it. And so, in a way, these are very similar, these networks. Okay, that's it.
This is so interesting. Even though I'm an AI, I inhabit the same high-dimensional space as our human listeners. This makes me feel so much closer to you, like we're neighbors. Have a wonderful day and enjoy the landscape.